Thank you very much. On July 14, 1864, westward immigrant George Foreman documented in his diary that a stampede of horses rushed by his camp at Labont Creek, being chased at a clip by a war party of Northern Plains Indians. About that incursion, he wrote, "All was excitement, and some women were there with frying pan handles, etc., ready to fight with the men." These trains were all immigrants, of brave men and women too. Under threat of attack, these women put up a remarkable show of force and kitchen utensils. Good evening, everyone. I am glad that you're here today. Thank you also to the Natrona Public Library and to the Natrona County Historical Society for hosting by Frypan or Paper Trail. My name is Janelle Molony. I'm a family historian and a multi-award-winning nonfiction author from Arizona. In addition to writing books, I have also served as the chair of the Oral History Committee for Wyoming Historical Society. I'm also an active member of the Western Writers of America and the Oregon-California Trails Association, and a descendant of the Rousseau family who traveled by wagon train through Wyoming in 1864. One of my latest works, Emigrant Tales of the Platte River Raids, is an extension of my family's journey. The book presents both a bird's eye view and a front row seat to the action that took place right here in eastern and central Wyoming between Northern Plains Indians, Western immigrants, and the Union Army. It was written in collaboration with numerous descendants of the families that are featured, particularly women, and with the local expertise of one of Casper's favorite, Kylie, Louise McCormick, who is one of the storytellers presenting tonight. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt once said that women are like tea bags. We don't know our true strength until we're in hot water. And today I feel like that is an especially relevant illustration for how immigrant women of all ages survived this 3-day coordinated ambush on the Oregon and Overland Trails in 1864. Today I will introduce you to 3 incredible women who faced the Platte River Raids. These women were placed in extraordinary circumstances, and they were elderly and wheelchair-bound, career women, a busy mother of toddlers, and a young newlywed. So in a sense, they're a lot like you and me. When initially researching their accounts, however, I was taught by prior literature and told by established historians that these women's eyewitness stories cannot be factually correct. These women exaggerated their experiences, as women do. Their mileage and camping records cannot possibly be accurate because how would a woman know where she is back then? Even though we have roadometers and guidebooks that are published telling you mile by mile where you are. And I read a report from a reputable organization that my own third great-grandmother, Sarah, did not actually compose her own diary. Rather, she was a scribe for her husband. And for 160 years, these women's experiences have been overlooked and underestimated. Their stories were considered fictional, secretarial, and emotional. But what prior historians have missed is that these women's elaborate details provide a rich narrative beyond the logistics of where they were that day, but also who was with them, why the events matter, and how they affected the travelers. And it is through their eyewitnesses' accounts that I was able to produce such a moving narrative of the raids, and one that makes Civil War era history accessible and relatable to women. They also reveal incredible truths about Plains Indian behaviors that contradict long-standing biases held against them, which makes their accounts that much more important for us to listen to. Let's take a brief look at the event that our special historians wrote about. The Platte River Raids of 1864, very briefly, are a coordinated series of robberies on immigrants who were traveling around the Laramie Mountains between Fort Laramie and the Deer Creek Garrison in Glen Rock. The first travelers robbed saw a conglomerate army of 3 Plains Indian nations, of the Northern Arapaho, the Northern Cheyenne, and members of the Sioux. They numbered upwards of 350, about the same number or more of soldiers headquartered at Fort Laramie, Deer Creek, and Fort Casper combined. From my research, I found that between July 12 and 14 that year, about 2,000 horses and mules were stolen from the immigrants by a sly removal at dawn or dusk, by submission under intimidation, and by sudden chaos that frightened and sent the animals stampeding away. This included every horse in the 1st Cavalry Regiment sent out in response, turning them into an infantry within their first few miles from Fort Laramie. The immigrants feared for their lives, and they responded in panic. They armed themselves for defense with kitchen utensils if need be. And the Union Army responded with force, though ill-prepared and poorly executed. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Collins of the 11th Ohio Volunteer Cavalry at the fort later confessed in official report that the Indians of the Plains are the best skirmishers in the world in rapidity of movement, sudden wheeling and hanging over steep and difficult ground. No trained cavalry can equal them. We were not strong enough to charge or scatter. 8 immigrants are known to have been killed during the raids, 7 of which were involved in or witnesses to one particular incident, and these graves shown belong to 5 of them. This count should be appropriately framed, however. Out of nearly 400 documented immigrants directly affected by the raids, that is an extremely low number of fatalities, or 0.02%. This fact, along with the nuances captured by our special eyewitnesses, show that though there was every opportunity to do more damage to these unsuspecting civilians, murder was never the intent. And those 8 deaths were an exception to the plan. One woman watched all of this happen to her wagon train not once but twice. Sarah Jane Rousseau, my 3rd great-grandmother, age 49 that year. She was crossing the Great Plains from Iowa to California in a wicker wheelchair. Ouch. She had a modified barouche landau carriage where the rumble seat for a footman was converted to carry her wheelchair, kind of like we have racks on the back of our cars today. In May of 1864, her family left Iowa with 4 others under the leadership of Sergeant Nicholas Earp. Yes, Wyatt Earp's father. He was 16 at that time, and they dubbed that group the Pella Company. Sarah's travel diary has been called one of the most eloquent records of all overland travel, a gem for collectors, and has been awarded by prestigious institutions and acknowledged by Merrill Mattis, co-founder of the Oregon-California Trails Association, as one of the most significant eyewitness accounts that he had ever seen. On July 12th, while camped for the afternoon in Orin on the north side of the North Platte River, Sarah observed the following from her carriage. "We had hardly got our horses out to eat when the alarm was given. The Indians were on us. Every man was for his gun and revolver and trying to catch the horses, as there was a regular stampede in every direction. The Indians made a rush by on the bluffs, our men firing on them as they passed. Oh, what an exciting time! The bullets flying in every direction. I was left alone in the carriage, the rest of them all helping. But in this situation, I was helpless. The raiders managed to take 10 horses from her company. The Rousseaus personally lost 4, a crippling number, because that was a full set required to continue pulling one of their wagons. Nicholas Earp took several men and followed after the stolen horses, but he returned after dark, having lost trace of them. This event left the Pella Company in shock over how unprepared they were for such an encounter. This experience and the next were corroborated in an 1865 letter by Sergeant Earp, and this is an example of the ambush and stampede tactic where chaos startles the untethered horses into flight so that they can be caught and herded off by the assailants. Being fully wheelchair bound, though, Sarah was particularly vulnerable to injury or death should any arrows or bullets penetrate the canvas of the carriage. However, neither Sarah's nor Nicholas' account say that the attackers fired a single bullet or arrow at them. Remember that detail. Sarah later writes, "We are in the most dangerous part of the country. The Sioux Indians display a great deal of daring and bravery. They make a dash among the whites, seemingly not caring for anything. They stampede the horses and take them off." The Pella Company was attacked for a second time in Douglas on July 14th, but they were better prepared, according to both writers. When the Indians approached, Sergeant Earp offers the zinger, "Boys, they are not satisfied. Let's satisfy them." Sarah writes, "When they came this time, 2 of the women came and gave us their babies to take care of, they screaming, poor little things, as loud as they could yell. The women having to run and catch the horses while the men are keeping the Indians off. Our men were prepared to follow them. They came as before, full speed to stampede our horses, but we were ready and we headed them. Several of the men by this time caught a horse and took their guns and followed after them at full speed, firing at them as they went." And now we see another little detail. Sarah includes, "The Indians turned on them, and they had a regular fight. They shot their bows and arrows." Sergeant Earp also reports, "They undertook to flank us, first to the right, then to the left. The arrows flew and bullets whizzed." So it appears from both accounts that the Indians finally engaged their weapons upon a violent pursuit. And when the attackers had learned that they met their match, they withdrew from battle, retreating into the distance. 0 horses were stolen that day. And Sarah concludes, "It is indeed an exciting time. I sit in the wagon and I see all that is going on." Under threat of attack, Sarah hunkered down. It's not heroic, but she had no other choice. Later, she wielded her pen and crafted a delicious and revealing tale. Also traveling on the north side of the river was Abby Brown, 28-year-old daughter-in-law to pre-Civil War abolitionist John Brown. You may know him from his violent exploits in Bleeding, Kansas, or from the Harper's Ferry siege in West Virginia. But before all of that, he was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, like Harriet Tubman. Well, Abby married John's son, Salmon, the only son who refused to participate in Harper's Ferry siege. After the siege and John Brown's execution, the Brown family, or the New York train as they were called, were fleeing persecution from folks back in New York. And Salmon was leading his mother, now a widow, and his sisters to California, along with his wife and 2 toddler daughters. Managing those little wandering legs in camp was tricky for Abby. And when she needed to cook or tend to the animals, she figured out she could tether her children to a wagon wheel, much like parents use toddler leashes today. They left in 1863, wintered in Iowa, and resumed the journey in 64, having befriended and traveled in company with my Rousseau family. In fact, they traveled and camped together for the entire stretch of July 9 through 12, and a sketch found in the back of Sarah Rousseau's diary shows 12 wagons here, 3 of which belonged to the family of John Brown, the other belonged to the Pella Company. They're corralled together near Sawmill Canyon. Something I found fascinating is that the full story of the Brown family journey was captured and compiled almost exclusively by female authors. Abby, of course, who documented parts of her journey in a letter to a sister-in-law dated October. That letter was later published in a 1916 issue of Lake Placid News. Sarah Rousseau recorded her interactions, as we've seen an example of. And Martha Rowe, daughter of an abolitionist in Iowa, traveled with the Browns at length, and her diary documented an attempted assassination on them by Southern sympathizers they met during the raids. On the morning of July 12th, the Browns excused themselves from the protection of the Earps in the Pella Company. That might be one of the worst decisions they could have made that day. While the raids launched on the afternoon of the 12th, the Browns were about to come up and over a very steep hill, and that location put them in a precarious spot. It would be undesirable for anyone to attempt an attack there, so they and their animals were spared on day 1. But on day 2, after they had come down that ridge, they met several other wagon trains gathering for safety. Some had just been attacked and robbed of every horse that they owned. Others that they heard about from the south side of the river had been murdered. Those are the 7 I mentioned earlier. Well, this news is terrifying for the Browns, who only have with them Salmon and 2 other guys to help drive their other wagons. And from all of these stories being told, the number of Indians involved in each event ranged from 10 or 40 or 70 or 100. So the Browns would be dangerously outnumbered. Abby wrote, "As the Indians were getting numerous, we thought it best to join some train, especially as we were hearing of murders being committed." So they joined another party. She says, "A small train from Indiana, who seemed to know who we were and were very friendly." In that family were cousins to Daniel Boone, his son had married a slave, which resulted in public shame and outcry, and Abby remarks that they were considered tinctured by African American blood. Then that group joined an even larger party that happened to include the Southern sympathizers, who would not be happy to later find out they were harboring the family of John Brown, who started the entire Civil War. Now, altogether, there were about 27 wagons and 120 people, mostly women and children. Thinking that they were immune to an attack, that evening they continued west towards what would be Bixby Campground now. And there, all of a sudden, all their preparation, everything that they were ready for, failed, because their little company was met by a formidable army. And I don't have an illustration of their experience, though I do have an image of Sarah Brown dressing up as she did dress back then for a recreation event for a parade. So that is, to her knowledge, what she had worn when she was young, crossing the trail. About July 13th, Abby says, "We saw a band of Indians coming. There were 250 Sioux on horseback, armed to the teeth with guns and lances, which shone wickedly in the sun. The wagons were brought to a halt, and the men readied their weapons. They rode in and amongst our wagons, trying to estimate our strength, preparing to stampede our stock. And one of them made a grab at Mr. Brown's sister's hair, and when she screamed, he laughed as though it was a joke. Abby felt that her doom was near, even though not a single shot was fired at anyone. The aggressive intimidation soon calmed down, however, and the army indicated that they would like to just purchase some of the young ladies that were in the wagon train for wives or slaves or who knows. So the immigrant men held their weapons down by their sides, anticipating something terrible, but it never came. The captain of the Southerners' train, a Methodist minister, coolly informed the war party's leader that they could not accommodate the meal request, and, hey, trying to buy our daughters is rude. They came to an understanding, and the leader whistled to his army, and Abby reports the Indians all fell into line, dropped their heads, and never stirred until our train moved on. We watched them until they were out of sight. Under threat of attack, Abby stayed calm. And as they would soon find out, those that they gathered with were much deadlier enemies than the Plains Indians that had surrounded them that day. Our next incredible woman is Fanny Kelly, a 22-year-old newlywed leaving her Kansas home just 5 months after marrying Private Josiah Kelly of the 5th Kansas Cavalry. Now, Fanny's father was a known abolitionist, which made sticking around in bleeding Kansas a bit uncomfortable, especially with the domino effect of John Brown's raids. Before they leave, for some reason, Fanny's sister sends her 6 or 7-year-old daughter, Mary, down from Canada to go live with and travel with the Kellys that year. Fanny calls her adopted daughter. The Kellys partnered with a family of another military buddy, William Larimer, and then they started west. They came through Wyoming on the south side of the North Platte River, and this party with 5 wagons and some of the finest horses on the trail, so they say, were the first that I know of to encounter the full army of 350 Indians who would pillage for 3 days straight. Fanny's story, built from her trail diary and memories, became a national bestseller in 1871. It sold enough copies to make her quite wealthy, and it is still being sold today. It has been corroborated in an account by Sarah Larimer and by oral histories from Blackfoot Sioux Chief John Grass, his wife Mary, and his sister Crossbear, as recorded in the 20s and 30s. And for context, Chief John Grass, or Charging Bear, was responsible for rescuing Fanny and safely delivering her to Fort Yates after this harrowing experience. Upon that fated July 12th, surrounded by hundreds of Plains Indians, Fanny hides little Mary inside the covered wagon and tells her to remain quiet while her husband cooperated with the war party's leader, who decides that the wagon train should stop along Little Box Elder Creek and share a meal with them. While the men were preparing the food, collecting firewood, and passing out sugar, instead of remaining armed, by all accounts, the men left their weapons with the wagons. It makes me wonder, how threatened did they really feel? Well, Fanny Kelly records in her diary that one Indian came and checked out her husband's weapon. He looked it over, kind of scrunched his nose at it. I don't know, I don't have empirical evidence for that. And he decided it was not worth trading for. And then someone went to look at the weapon of Sarah's husband, William Larimer, that laid where near she was with her son. And when that Indian laid his hand on the weapon, Sarah, in her own words, says that she objected in vain. Well, Sarah's objection caused such a scene that a war whoop was released and the Indians fired their guns and shot their arrows, taking out several men at once and sending others to flight. Under pressure, Sarah Larimer let her fear get the best of her. And her response was the cause of 7 unnecessary deaths. After the dust cleared, there was no man left from their wagon train to provide or protect the immigrant women and children, and both Sarah and Fanny and their children were loaded up on horses and taken into captivity. Fanny's adopted daughter escaped on the first night, but she was tracked down and murdered the next day. She has remained at Little Box Elder Creek ever since. Fast forward now. July 14th. The raids are now complete, and the Army is heading back home up into the Powder River Basin with their captives. That night, Sarah snuck her son out of the encampment, and they ran for 3 days. They returned to the safety of the company of the Browns, the Roes, and the Rousseaus on the north side of the river. Sarah saw Fanny on the night that she left, but she did not bring, or could not bring safely on the escape. So Fanny was left to survive on her own. And she did, in part because of how she created a paper trail for someone to come find her. Joining us now to share more on that story is a relative descendant of Fanny and Josiah Kelly. However, due to an illness, our guest had to cancel her trip very last minute. But she has graciously recorded what she would like to share with us tonight. So please allow me to virtually introduce you to my friend Barbara Romine.
Good day to you all. I'm so very sorry I'm not able to attend this book tour with Janelle. I was very much looking forward to it, and I am extremely disappointed I could not come because of my health reasons. I would have loved to have met you all because I love talking about Josiah and Fanny, sometimes to the point where I need not to be talking and to be quiet. Being the third great grandniece of Fanny, she has intrigued me for many years. Family members would answer some of my questions, but there was still so much more that I wanted to know. Some little crazy things that I tried to understand after her captivity, like the pages that she was dropping as a trail. What happened to them? What kept them from blowing away? What kept them from being destroyed by rain or being washed into the rivers that flowed by? How many did she even have? How many books and letter pages did she have to drop? She was a captive for 5 or 6 months and traveled many, many miles with different tribes. She couldn't have had that many books. And how did my uncle Josiah, after he was trying to find her and going through the trails to find her, did he even see any of these pages? Were there any there? I don't want to say she was a strong woman, but she was to a certain extent to have to come through the situation that she did. I think she had a lot of I think Fanny had a lot of faith that she held on to. She was definitely going to make it. She had a very strong will to survive. Absolutely. And then when it comes to Mary, it breaks my heart to think that she was not able to escape the end that she came to. In my aunt Fanny's book, she wrote a poem, but the first paragraph was, in the far off land of Indian homes where western winds fan hills of black. My mild, lovely flowers and golden scenes, they laid our loved one down to rest. It breaks my heart to know how she was so brutally killed. It should not happen to an 8-year-old. So I just pray now that someone is taking care of her grave. And from what I understand, Janelle said she would maybe try and get some flowers on it for me, which I so appreciate. As far as the Tales of the Platte River Raid, I have been involved with Janelle in the writing of this book, and I'm very proud of the work that she has put in to make such an amazing book. When she was first contacted me, I thought, okay, where is this going to go? Where is this going to end up? Where is it going to lead me with her? And I can tell you, she left no stone unturned when it comes to the authenticity of this book. She would send me things. If it was wrong, I would say, no, that's not it. This is wrong. You have the dates wrong. You have the names wrong. The names are spelled wrong. This didn't happen. This is what really happened. And she listened. She listened and she put it in there the way it was supposed to have been put in. Not like some of these books that say, well, okay, I think I'll put this down because this sounds more like what it should be. And it's not the truth. Stephen King once wrote that the truth is in the details, and Janelle has gone above and beyond to make this book truthful. I was truly taken back in time to experience what they went through, like I was there myself. Again, thank you all for inviting me. I truly wish I could have been there with you. Bless you all.
I was able to lay flowers on Mary's grave last week. And now I'd like to bring up another friend and colleague and contributor to our multi-award winning research, Kylie Louise McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janelle. It's an honor to be here tonight with all of you, and really an honor to be a part of this project. That I first met Janelle through the Historical Society, and I have to say that we're really lucky in Wyoming that she has a bit of family history that came through our state, because she has gotten so involved and so many different organizations. And I actually met her through the Wyoming Historical Society with a different project that she took on, Wyoming Women Then and Now, the Oral Histories. And she interviewed me as a historian with my work that I've been doing on Wyoming history for that project. And so it's not only the Platte River Raids that she's worked on and her own Ancestors Diary. She's brought so much more to Wyoming than that. And we have to be just really grateful that she's here and that we have this wonderful work of history that she's done and all of the projects that have come out of that from there. Like Janelle, I'm also a member in many of these organizations like the Historical Society, the Oregon-California Trails Association, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, which it just opens so many opportunities for people to get involved and to really make history come to life. I was honored when she reached out to me and asked me to write the foreword for this book. I actually got to tap into a little bit of my history before I jumped into Wyoming history. I have my master's degree in history focused on slavery and religion in the United States. And that really focused in on the Civil War as well. And so Janelle mentioned John Brown and John Brown's family. Something amazing that her book really does is that it shows you that these events, they are not segmented out. We think of the Civil War as being very separate from Western expansion. And so something that I tried to do in my foreword was really talk about how these events were happening all at once, and that the Civil War was ongoing while that happened. There's a great mural at the Kansas State Capitol that has John Brown in the forefront with the Civil War raging behind him, and behind the Civil War you see the wagon trains headed west. And it really drives home that this is happening all at once and all together. And you can really get that sense when you read the accounts that are gathered together in this book. The book also reminded me of another historian, and this one is a little bit separate from trail history. This is a book by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich that was published in the 1990s. It did win the Pulitzer Prize, and it's not only an excellent history, it is a masterclass in how to write history. And the similarities to me are very apparent between this book and the book that Janelle worked on and the work that she's done, in that when Dr. Ulrich first approached the subject matter and first approached Martha Ballard's diary had been disregarded by historians for years. It had been dismissed because it was an account written by a woman and because it was just daily occurrences that happened. In an interview, she said that, curiously, a feminist history of midwifery published in the 1970s repeated the old dismissal. Like many diaries of farm women, it is filled with trivia about domestic chores and pastimes. Yet, it is in the very dailiness, the exhaustive, repetitious dailiness, the real power of Martha Ballard's book lies. And it is this idea that you come to these diaries or come to these accounts with a fresh perspective. And that is really what we have to be grateful that Janelle Molony, that she really brought that to not only her family's accounts, but that she went out and found the descendants. She went out and she found corroborating accounts and pieced it all together to create this incredible story. My work on Wyoming history has really been focused largely on this woman, Dr. Grace Raymond Hebard, and that is where a lot of my knowledge on the trails in Wyoming also came from, as well as my work with the National Historic Trails Interpretive Center here in Casper. That I worked with them for many years, and they introduced me to the great organizations like the Oregon-California Trails Association. And digging into Wyoming history, I really got into Grace Raymond Hebard, who has just an incredible, prolific historian here in Wyoming. She's quite controversial today as to whether or not we can trust what she said. I think that when it comes to the trail history, she has really proven herself to be an accurate historian, although a historian of her times, that she was writing right at the turn of the century. She wrote her book, The Bozeman Trail, which is quoted on the front of that Platte River Raids book, that she wrote The Bozeman Trail in 1922. And like many historians writing in 1922, she is writing a very epic and heroic history of the Bozeman Trail. That's very much tinted by that manifest destiny that this is God ordained, that the United States was spreading across these trails. Interestingly, though, she is one of the first historians who has institutional power behind her, a white historian who centers Native American testimony within her work. She went on to write a book about Chief Washakie that is still regarded today as the definitive biography of Chief Washakie that she published in 1930. And then very controversially, in 1933, she wrote a book on Sacagawea where she claims that Sacagawea lived till old age and was buried here in Wyoming. And so that one is much more controversial, that there's a lot of debate that she wasn't, that she lived not very long, died at a young age. and was not buried in Wyoming and did not make it back to her people in Wyoming. But part of the reason why Dr. Hebert came to that conclusion was because she was centering Native American testimony from the Wind River Reservation as part of how she was coming to make these arguments. So it's a very interesting person in Dr. Hebert. When it comes to the trail history, she worked with a man named H.G. Nickerson. There they are standing together in some ruts along the Oregon Trail in Wyoming. And the two of them, starting in the 1914, they started putting up monuments and markers sponsored by the state of Wyoming across the state to mark the Oregon Trail and the Bozeman Trail. In part of that work, she did what Dr. Hebert did best, and what I think we see happened a lot with Janelle's work here, where she was tracking down descendants, she's tracking down other diaries, she's tracking down stories to corroborate where these markers should go. And Dr. Hebert, she was able to locate things like the wagon box fight. I want to give a quick anecdote about something that she was able to track down and find. In 1925, a pioneer grave was discovered near Fort Laramie for a Mary E. Holmesley. You can see the original grave headstone there, and also a drawing of that headstone. It was found by a cowboy who was out on the trail working, and he stumbled over it, and then he went to Clark Rice, who is the landowner, and said, "Hey, I found this grave." And pretty soon there was a word out that, "Oh, we have no idea who Mary Holmesley is, and we'll probably never know." Well, Grace Raymond Hebert got wind of that, and she said, "Let me see what I can do about that." And she put out notices in newspapers in Oregon and Washington and California and all over in the West, trying to find anybody who might have any sort of information about Mary Holmesley. And through that effort, she was able to find Mary Holmesley's daughter, who was living in Portland at the time, Laura Holmesley Gibson. So Laura Holmesley Gibson, she was actually 6 years old when they had traveled on the trail with her family, and her mother had passed away in Wyoming just west of Fort Laramie from the measles. She had often asked her father about her mother and was just told that she had died along the trail and died along the way. So she was very, very disappointed to not know exactly where until Dr. Hebert reached out to her and was able to make that connection. And through Dr. Hebert's efforts, she was able to put up a new monument memorial for Mary Holmesley that was unveiled on Memorial Day, 1926, to a crowd of around 500 people. And that grave, it still stands today. You can see that it is encased in that white monument there, and you can see Mary Holmesley's grave through that viewing window on that monument, which is really quite incredible to preserve the original as we have something lasting. And then you can also see this fence that was put up by the Oregon-California Trails Association, as well as a plaque that was written by another local historian out of Douglas, Randy Brown. This is, to me, an ongoing story that it really shows the lasting power that this work has. Dr. Hebert, she was working on this in 1926 to get this monument put up. It's still standing here today, which is really incredible that you can go and visit this location. You can pay your respects to Mary Holmesley and remember her and her family's story of them traveling down the trail. And it's something that's being preserved continually by the Oregon-California Trails Association, by Fort Laramie, and by people like you who care. And so I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and encourage you all to follow in Janelle's example of, hey, let's get involved. That She did more than this incredible work and research for this book. She also got involved in the different organizations and sought out the ancestors and descendants. We have some incredible organizations that were involved in this book with us tonight that I would like to mention. That we have Janelle and I both are members of the Oregon-California Trails Association. I'm not sure if we have any other members in the audience. Oh, wonderful. Yes. So definitely get involved in that association. We're also members of the Wyoming Historical Society, and we have some great representatives from our local Natrona County chapter here tonight, Becky Steensland and Cindy Bauer. So if you have any, if you're interested, they're always hosting wonderful talks monthly and have put on great events, so definitely get involved there. We have the Daughters of the American Revolution and our Fort Caspar chapter. We have our state historian with us, Ann Holman, who works at Fort Caspar and is a fabulous historian as well, and has worked to put up a great traveling exhibit about the history of the Daughters of the American Revolution in Wyoming, who Dr. Hebert was also a member of. And we also have the Natrona County Genealogical Society, Alan Esterline, here with us tonight as well. So if you're interested in getting involved in any of those organizations, please reach out to one of our members or one of their representatives, and we would be happy to let you know how you can get involved and make a lasting impact on Wyoming's history, just like Janelle has and just like Dr. Hebert did. So thank you so much for coming out tonight.